Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from Hot Lead Zone, and this is the story of a gun, but it's not this gun. This is my Model 27 Smith & Wesson Classic, of course, but the story of a gun that I want to tell you about is a gun that I don't have anymore. It's a Model 28 Highway Patrolman, which is the same gun as this one, except that it didn't have a good finish to it. It was a matte finish, didn't have the refinements, but basically it was the same gun as this Model 27. Back in the year 1971, I walked into the gun store and there was a nice Model 27. Really nice gun, but I couldn't afford it. Well, right next to it was a Model 28 Highway Patrolman, same gun but less finish, and also much more affordable gun, so I bought that one. Well, just imagine that this Model 27 had a kind of a matte finish to it, and the trigger was almost as good as the Model 27, not quite, but almost as good, and it had Magna stocks on it and this kind of thing instead of the Target stocks that the Model 27 had, and that was the Model 28, and that's the one that I bought. It happened to be my very first revolver that I purchased. My first gun was a 1911 Colt 45 automatic because Jeff Cooper was really big in those days. But my first revolver was my Model 28 357 Magnum. The reason why I bought it was that was the era of the high velocity Super Vel, and we did a lot of ground squirrel shooting, hunting, varminting in those days, and I wanted to blow up the little critters with 110 grain jacketed hollow cavity Sierra bullets, and so the Model 28 was destined to do a lot of squirrel shooting. Yes, indeed, those were the Super Vel days when a fellow named Lee Juris actually shook the handgun shooting world by going with light bullets and the highest velocity possible to get effect. So here's a box of Super Vel that was left over from all those times in the past, and look at that label there, a place called Tri-City Sporting Goods. That doesn't even exist anymore, but $8.55 for a box of 50 premium ammo in those days. That kind of tells you about the time frame we're talking about. Well, that meant that I had to work up a lot of loads of a high velocity, as much velocity as we could get, and I had a Bushnell 2-power scope on that Model 28 that was mounted with the Bushnell mounts and this kind of thing. That was the scope sight that was used on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. with their special spy gun, had the Bushnell scope on there. Well, what followed was weeks and weeks of extensive load testing until I got a 110 grain jacketed hollow cavity load with H110 powder that was screaming maximum charge and able to blow up water bottles and ready to go out and shoot ground squirrels with that Bushnell 2-power scope, this kind of thing. I shot that gun every way it could have been shot. Two-handed, one-handed, fast double action, slow double action, single action fire, firing from a rest as if I was hunting in the field, using the scope, not using the scope, taking the scope off, all of that kind of thing. That gun was shot every way it could have been shot, including upside down. In fact, during load testing, I remember that the first time and only time that I ever blew a head off of a case was with a hot load, and the 357 Magnum case actually separated. The head came off. When I ejected the rounds, the head of the case was in my hand, and the cylinder still had the body of the case in there, so I had to poke it out. And the reason why I blew the head off the case was because I was using this Winchester 630P powder, which actually was mislabeled by the factory. It was not 630P. It was some kind of powder that Winchester made that was very fast burning, even faster than Bullseye probably, because the charges that were published for 630P using that mislabeled powder was heavy overloads, and I was lucky I didn't blow the gun up. But Winchester actually recalled this powder, and then they came out with 630 powder after that in a whole new labeling. So that was an interesting incident that happened back in those days. Part of the story of a gun. That gun was shot so much that I actually learned firsthand what end shake was, because I was able to get some back and forth movement of the cylinder that wasn't there when I first bought the gun. It also developed some minor timing issues as well as the end shake. So I decided to sell that gun, but before I sold it, to make it more sellable, I took the target stocks off of a recently acquired Model 29 8 3/8 inch Smith & Wesson and put it on that Model 28, and then I went ahead and sold that gun. Well, shooters and reloaders out there, surprise, surprise. As I was doing this video, it occurred to me that in my old drawer of grip stocks and this kind of thing, that I might still have those old set of Magna grips. And so, sure enough, that box that had the Shooting Star grips that I bought to replace these Magnas, the Magnas are in that box. So here they are, installed on my Model 27, and you see these grips were never used. Back in 1971, these are brand new grip stocks. Well, what can you say? And in fact, it doesn't feel bad in the hand. If I were shooting target loads, that would feel pretty good. We might just go ahead and find a use for those today. That's what the revolver looked like with a Magna stocks on there and a matte finish. When I acquired my Model 27, and that was the same model that I had passed up on back in 1971, so now that I got my Model 27, I've come full circle, but always remember that Model 28 with a lot of fondness because of all the time I spent with that. So that's the story of a gun that I don't even have anymore. Model 28 Smith & Wesson Highway Patrolman. Well, it kind of makes you wonder though that the story of the gun actually continued after I sold it. And what has happened to that gun since then? Have no way of knowing, and who knows whether that gun is still alive today. It may be that it's been destroyed. Maybe it's had a lot more escapades and adventures associated with it. No way to tell the story of that gun as it went forth from the time I sold it. And it's interesting that any gun that we buy used has a story also of its own that preceded the purchase of the gun, that oftentimes we don't know what the story of a gun was. So that applies to that Model 28. Whoever owns it now is probably wondering what that gun went through before it was purchased, and it went through a lot for sure. Bye for now.